meantime, pro-Palestinian groups want some progressive Democrats voted out this November. Continuing what Emily was discussing there, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee plans to spend $100 million to help unseat progressives who have spoken out against Israel. The group Democrat Majority for Israel is specifically targeting Congressman Jamal Bowman of New York and Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri. Both are polling behind their primary challengers. The group's founder told The Hill, "We're not interested in defeating people who are progressive. We're not interested in defeating people who are pro-Palestinian. We are interested in defeating people who are anti-Israel." Here now, Mitch Ceasar, Democratic strategist and former DNC board member. Thanks for being here this morning. Nice to see you. How much influence and power do these groups wield?
Well, it remains to be seen. I don't think they wield as much as the media they actually garner. What we have to remember is if this is in a solid Democratic district, there's literally no harm, no foul, because, once the person's the nominee, if they're in a very blue district, it's not going to really matter. It may matter if it's a swing district, which I seriously doubt. It's also interesting that you don't have AOC in this group of targeted. She's been a supporter of Israel, so it's not unanimous among, the squad, so to speak. What we really have to look at is that it's really across all bounds, across all spectrums, as you showed in a prior story, that people with the picketing at Columbia and so on and so forth. Young people and people in general are very disturbed by what's going on. But by the same token, I do not see them ever voting for Donald Trump. Obviously, the danger is if they sit home in key states like Michigan and so forth. So they're going to have some impact. I don't think it'll be the impact they presume it may be. Only time's going to tell. But this is more or less almost a societal cross-section.
And what does it require of the Biden administration right now to make a distinction between some of what people are demonstrating about, whether it's pro-Palestinian or considered anti-Israel, or even some who are considered pro-Hamas? Where does the Biden administration calculate that politically, and how do they step in to clarify?
Well, historically, and certainly among Democratic presidents, but historically in the United States, we've been very supportive of Israel. I think the president has been mindful of these protests. I think he's reacted indirectly in his dealings with Netanyahu, which frankly isn't particularly popular here, nor has he been for a really long time. And recently, congressional leaders, Democrats, commented about his removal or resigning. I think he's been looking at the situation. He's in an impossible situation. It's almost like the economy. No matter what he does, he doesn't get credit for, but everybody gets blamed. I think it's somewhat similar here. It's obviously a political tightrope, but he's reacting appropriately and in a measured sense and really getting better at messaging, which Democrats have not always been. I think this sums up by saying the old saying, and I'm paraphrasing, Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall in love. We're kind of a loose group. We're never good at solidifying until the end. So this may be an indication of that.
And as you look at the tea leaves, Mitch, which of the states do you think that the president will have the biggest challenge come November when it comes to some of these uncommitted groups?
I think Michigan by far, because of the demographic there by far, and I do think he'll win that. I think Pennsylvania, but that's really his adopted home. I think he'll win Pennsylvania despite some of these situations. And obviously the protests in New York City are, that's about one of the bluest areas there are, which is why Trump carps about it during his trial. I think he really has to focus on Michigan. I don't see it as much an issue in Arizona or Nevada or some of the other traditional swing states we all talk about.
And how about some of the down ballot races? Who may be most impacted by the power these groups are able to put forth?
Well, if anyone will be on the congressional level, I don't see it on the legislative or city council levels in even the swing states. I really don't. And again, two people have been specifically targeted. And sure enough, look how most of those folks had voted, I believe, in the Sunday vote. So I guess AIPAC figures they have nothing to lose. What's interesting is J Street, which is a much more progressive pro-Israel PAC, is also not supporting those two Democratic folks. That really shows almost a split, but one of expediency.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.